While technological advancement during the Second World War changed global militaries forever, most of the war was still fought in the old-fashioned way, with guts, grit, and grinding attrition. In this video, we tell the story of the obsolete yet instrumental ScrapIron Flotilla, one of the toughest Australian units of World War II. Technically, the ScrapIron Flotilla was actually the Australian destroyer flotilla and was made up of 5 hand-me-down destroyers. His Majesty's Australian ships Stuart, Voyager, Vampire, Vendetta, and Waterhen. Besides a few cool names, these ships didn't have much going for them. Constructed in 1917 and 1918 for service with the Royal Navy in the Great War, they were relics by the 1930s. And what do the English do when they've got old hardware that they don't need? Well, sell it to the Dominions, of course. In 1933, Australia had already scrapped 5 Great War era destroyers, so naturally, the Admiralty thought that they wanted more, sending 5 of their oldest destroyers to Sydney. Beholden to the crown, the Aussies couldn't say no. They made the best of the situation though, and when war broke out in September 1939, the flotilla was armed and ready to fight. It was initially sent to Singapore to defend Australia against a Japanese attack, but the Admiralty were more worried about what was happening closer to home and diverted the ships to Malta. When the flotilla arrived in the Mediterranean in January 1940, it was laughed at by the Germans and Italians. The Great War era ships weren't designed to endure air attacks and were massively outclassed by the brand spanking new Italian fleet. German propagandists claimed the ships had been assembled in a junkyard and christened them the ScrapIron Flotilla. The Aussies loved it and renamed themselves immediately, confusing the Axis to no end. For the ScrapIron Flotilla, the war began in June 1940, when fascist Italy entered it. The day after it was declared, Italian bombers began raiding Malta's shipyards. The Australian destroyers were quickly put to sea, but almost immediately ran into minefields. During the night, Italian submarines laid minefields around Malta's approaches, correctly guessing the Allies would start patrolling the Mediterranean in force. The lead ScrapIron ship, Stuart, only discovered the minefield after steaming right into it. After a lucky escape, Stuart and the rest of the flotilla were put to work hunting submarines. By June 20th, only 9 days after Italy had entered the war, they had already sunk 2 subs without losing a single destroyer. This was the start of the long haul for the ScrapIron Flotilla. They were the workhorses of the Mediterranean fleet, spending virtually all their time at sea and rarely stopping in port for repairs. They were constantly under attack by Italian submarines and German dive bombers, which inflicted terrible casualties on the Allied fleet. The obsolete destroyers were continually battered from air raids and their crews exhausted from nighttime submarine hunts, but they kept patrolling. The whole Mediterranean theatre changed in March 1941 with the Battle of Cape Matapan. This battle was the single most decisive engagement of the Mediterranean Naval War and the largest fleet action of the European theatre. When the smoke cleared, 3 Italian cruisers and 2 destroyers were on their way to the bottom of the sea, and one of Italy's best battleships was effectively crippled. In March 1941, the nerds at Bletchley Park managed to crack the Italian naval codes. They discovered that the Italian battle fleet was moving out of port, which they seldom did due to risk of Allied air attacks, to destroy a fleet of supply ships bound for Greece. The British admirals were desperate to blow something up and committed their strongest force to chase down the Italians. Their battle fleet consisted of 1 aircraft carrier, 3 battleships and 8 destroyers, which included half of the battered but battle-ready ScrapIron Flotilla. After a devastating carrier air attack crippled the Italian battleship Vittorio Veneto, the British chased down the Italian fleet into the night. At around 10:23 PM, Aussie ScrapIron destroyer Stuart sighted the Italian fleet and guided the British battleships in for the kill. 4 minutes later, the destroyers illuminated an enemy column consisting of 2 heavy cruisers and 4 destroyers with their searchlights. The 3 British battleships behind Stuart finally got to test their mettle. At less than 3,000 yards, which is pretty much point blank for a battleship, they let loose with all their guns. Shells ripped into the Italian vessels and tore the fleet apart. The heavy cruisers were blown to pieces almost immediately and never got a chance to shoot back. With British fire focused on burning the heavy cruisers, the Italian destroyers counterattacked. Their small caliber guns couldn't dent such massive targets, so they charged the battleships to get in torpedo range. Stuart and the other destroyers immediately swung around and countercharged, blazing away with guns and torpedoes. This furious defense forced the Italian destroyers to retreat, and the battleships got away. The whole fight lasted about 4 minutes, but in that time, the heavy ships of the Italian fleet had been sunk or crippled. The Australian destroyers, under the command of Captain Walla, were instrumental in locating the fleet in the dark and defending the battleships from close-range torpedo attacks. The Battle of Matapan was devastating for the Italians, with the Italian fleet admiral commenting that the battle limited for some time our operational activities because it revealed our inferiority in effective aero-naval cooperation and the backwardness of our night battle technology. With its success hunting submarines and critical defense during the Battle of Matapan, the ScrapIron Flotilla was starting to gain a serious reputation in the Mediterranean theatre. The flotilla's captain, Walla, was commended regularly by the commander of the entire theatre, Admiral Cunningham. Cunningham described Walla as one of the finest types of Australian naval officers, greatly loved and admired by everyone, and even introduced him as one of the greatest captains who ever sailed the seas. When the unenviable task of resupplying the besieged Allied force in Tobruk was put across Cunningham's desk, he knew the man for the job. On the waves, the Italians had been dealt a decisive blow, but in the air, they were still a potent threat. This posed a direct risk to the British battleships and aircraft carriers of the Mediterranean fleet. Cunningham couldn't risk his best ships, especially when the Italians still had several brand new battleships and battle cruisers under repair in port. So he sent the ScrapIron Flotilla, comprised of the oldest and most bashed up ships he had. The ScrapIron boys had to make supply runs from the safety of British-controlled Egypt to besieged Tobruk, carrying ammunition and returning with wounded soldiers. During the day-long trip, they had to run the gauntlet of Luftwaffe dive bombers, Italian medium bombers and fighters, as well as the ever-present submarine threat. The ScrapIron Flotilla and the British 10th Destroyer Flotilla evacuated 47,000 men from Tobruk and brought in 34,000 reinforcements, along with 33,900 tons of stores during the 8-month siege between April and December 1941. The odds were stacked against the supply ships from the start, but the ground pounders in Tobruk needed ammo, meds and fuel, so the ships kept steaming. In typical fashion, the Aussies made a joke of it, naming their supply runs the Tobruk ferry service. Occasionally, the bombers caught them, and this meant a tooth and nail fight to stay above the waves. All in all, 33 ships didn't make it back, while 34 others limped away, badly damaged. During these nerve-wracking supply runs, the ScrapIron Flotilla lost its first ship. Waterhend, nicknamed Chook by the crew, was left critically damaged after an attack by 19 Stukas. The destroyer HMS Defender tried to rescue the stricken vessel, to no avail. Chook sank on June 30th, 1941, the first Australian ship lost in the Second World War. The loss of Chook prompted an investigation into the state of repair of the remaining ScrapIron ships. By this point, the obsolete destroyers had been in numerous battles and suffered a total of nearly 200 air raids. The ships were trembling in every rivet and had been patched up with whatever parts were available, sometimes with machinery from crippled battleships and metal from downed enemy planes. The flotilla was sent home to Australia, but there was serious doubt about whether the ships would actually make it home without falling apart. The ScrapIron Flotilla entered the Mediterranean obsolete but fit for action, and they left in a state that lived up to their adopted name. During their time in the Mediterranean Sea, the ScrapIron Flotilla sank 20 submarines, fought in both major battles of the theatre, completed countless supply runs to Tobruk, Malta, Greece and Crete, weathered scores of attacks, and not lost a single man. The hand-me-down destroyers built for the Great War survived everything the enemy threw at them and kept going. But the war was far from over, and after a refit at home, the flotilla was disbanded and the ship sent out to fight the Japanese. Captain Walla was given commands of a cruiser and fought alone to the last shell against an entire Japanese invasion fleet. After inflicting massive casualties in a battle described as a knife fight in a phone box, he went down with his ship and in history as the best Australian sea captain ever. That was the gritty tale of the ScrapIron Flotilla, the roughest and toughest Australian naval unit of the Second World War. But what do you think? How do you think they kept the old ships going for so long? Is throwing 19 Stukas at a single destroyer a bit overkill? Do you want to hear the story of Captain Walla fighting the Japanese? Let us know all this and more in the comment section below. And just to catch you guys before you click off to the next suggested video, if you guys are looking for another even more high quality history channel where we take a look at all the different badasses from all eras of history, you're gonna love our new channel called The Braved. That link is in the description below if you want to check it out. If you're more into the musical side of things, make sure you check out our Relax Jack music channel, where we take some of the music posted there and use it in the background of videos here. And if you want to further support us and get access to a behind the scenes Discord and some exclusive videos, check out our Patreon. And if you just want to join us on our wider community, check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Discord. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you in the next video.